Waking up between 1 and 3 a.m. is probably the most common challenge that we face in midlife. And for many years, we were told that this is related to cortisol. And more recently, there is some information pointing to the fact that it has to do more with the liver. Now, as with most things in the body, it's not necessarily an either or, it's actually both things. And in this video, I'm going to give you a quick overview of why it's all related. I'm going to give you 3 strategies to lean into so that you can actually turn things around and start getting a deeper, more restful sleep through the night. Okay. Now, the 3 things I'm going to share with you all really center around one principle, and that principle has to do with embracing bitters. So, embracing bitter foods, bitter herbs, and bitter emotions. Now, why bitters in particular? So, what we know scientifically is that when it comes to bitter compounds that are like in foods and in herbs, what they do is they stimulate the flow of bile. And bile is really important for liver function because the bile plays a role, for example, when it comes to regulating glucose, also plays a role when it comes to digestion, and certainly for the digestion of fats in particular, as well as when it comes to removing waste, right? So a lot of the waste in our body has to be escorted out of our systems through bile. So it's super, super important. And when that function isn't really in place, then, or is not working properly, then things start to fall out of whack, and we feel it in different ways as far as physical and also emotional symptoms. So the 3 strategies. First one will be bitter foods. Now, bitter foods, really, you don't necessarily have to work extra hard to find them, because the truth is there are bitter compounds in a lot of different foods, even if the food isn't extremely bitter. Really, the point here is consume more whole foods, because the more whole foods, unprocessed foods that you consume, more likely you're going to be exposed to these bitter compounds. Now, there are a few that are always good to be aware of, and I'm going to give you a short list. This list is not exhaustive, but some foods to keep in mind would be things like kale, dandelion greens, arugula, endives, right? If you've ever tasted endives, they're quite bitter. Artichokes, Brussels sprouts, cranberries, grapefruit, and then also dark chocolate, or even like just getting yourself raw cacao. So for example, I always have raw cacao at home because I love hot chocolate, but I do not, I make sure not to buy the pre-mixed, instant hot chocolate where you just dump everything and it's ready to go, because there's a lot of sugar. There's usually natural flavors that are really not natural in them, and all kinds of other things. So if you, for example, are a fan of hot chocolate, I strongly recommend that you just buy yourself raw cacao and make your own at home. It's really easy to make. So that's the food aspect. Those are just a few foods that give you those bitter compounds. Now, the second thing are the bitter herbs. So here again, also there are plenty to choose from, and you can start just with simple teas. You could buy a tincture, and it could be a tincture of an individual herb or a tincture of bitters. So there are some companies that sell like what are referred to as digestive bitters, and it's going to be a blend of different bitter herbs. These are actually quite popular in some cultures and in some traditions. So that's one way to get it. Now, personally, I actually like to just start with one of the most simple things. The one I recommend is chamomile, right? Chamomile or chamomile, however you pronounce it. Chamomile is, depending on how much of the herb you use and how long you steep it, you will find that you can pull out a lot of bitterness out of that tea. So that is a real simple everyday tea that is considered also a bitter. It is known to be an herb that supports digestive function, and that's one of the main reasons why it's used for supporting digestion, whether it's in adults or even in children. Okay, so I strongly recommend starting just with something like chamomile. Also, the benefit there is chamomile is a nervine, which means it is an herb that supports the nervous system. It is known for being relaxing. It is known for also supporting sleep, right? It can have a mild sedative effect depending on the person. So that to me is option number one. I actually have a video that I did a couple of months ago where I went more into different ways that chamomile can really help to support our body in midlife, especially during perimenopause. So I'm going to link to that so you can get more information and also see the two different methods that I share in that video as far as how to brew your chamomile tea. Okay. So outside of chamomile, there's also the other herbs like gentian is another one. I've never personally used it, but I have heard some herbalists talk about it, and apparently it's really, really strongly bitter. So gentian is another one. Burdock root, dandelion, right? So I talked in the previous section on foods about dandelion greens. You can also drink dandelion tea. That is also very, very common. And yeah, it's definitely a better. It's one that I have dandelion, but not just exclusively the tea. I have it as a blend with some other stuff. So that's what I recommend. I'm going to link to some brands that I recommend for this, whether you want to get individual herb or you want to get a pre-made blend. Now, the third strategy here is to process or digest bitter emotions. Now, this is a big one, and it's quite interesting when you start to look at it and kind of think about it from the perspective of everything we just talked about, and also think about it from the perspective of what the liver does. So, the first thing is this idea of the liver and bitter emotions being connected is something that comes from traditional Chinese medicine. In that tradition, the liver is where bitter emotions, particularly anger and frustration, that's where they live. So, which means if we are not processing them, they are going to take a toll on that organ and its ability to function optimally. Okay. And we know that the liver is part of our digestive system, right? If we're going to use language from Western medicine, it's part of our digestive system. So, interestingly, whether we're looking, so in both worlds, what we're seeing here is that the liver is where we are processing, where we are digesting different things, whether it's at food at the physical level or our emotions. It's all going to the liver, which sits somewhere around here on the right side of the body. So unprocessed, undigested, bitter emotions. So let's think about this in terms of like how this could potentially affect us. So when we're carrying around those emotions and they're not processed, what that's doing is contributing to our stress, right? When we are in that stress state, we are basically turning on our fight or flight mechanism. And our fight or flight mechanism is going to now mean that we're going to be releasing more stress hormones like cortisol or adrenaline, for example. Now, those hormones must be metabolized, and the organ that's going to do it is, of course, the liver, and then there's also the kidneys. Okay, but liver is going to first have to metabolize those stress hormones. So if we have this chronic stress, no matter whether it's low grade, high grade, however, whatever language, if there is the kind of just this constant release of these stress hormones, that is going to take a toll on the liver. Okay, so that is how, when I look at like how Western medicine talks about it and how like traditions like Chinese medicine talk about it, that is how I start to connect the dots, is that I realize that, oh yeah, you can't feel anger and frustration chronically and have it pile up without also turning on your stress response. So even though Chinese medicine is thousands of years old, and at the time when all of these concepts came up, we did not have language for like cortisol and adrenaline. We didn't have that language, and yet that concept of those emotions taking a toll on the liver was something that they understood. Don't know how, don't really care, because it's just helpful for us as humans to understand it, right? So that's that's basically this, in a very overly simplified way, how it becomes important to really support the liver to then make sure that we get sleep properly. Because the other thing too is that when there is stress, right, your liver also has to release more glucose, right? Because again, if you have to fight or flee, then you're going to need glucose, you're going to need energy. So your liver is also going to be having to do extra work to release more of that glucose. Now, this is now where things get even more interesting because the fight or flight mechanism is something that works perfectly if you truly are in physical danger and have to run away from something, right? But unfortunately for us, we we turn on, that response gets triggered while we're just doing what I'm doing now, right? I'm just sitting here recording a video, and that response can get turned on, and I'm not being chased by anything, which means I'm not running. So the problem now is there's a whole bunch of glucose in my blood. I'm not exerting myself. It's just going to keep, but then I'm chronically stressed and it's just going to keep piling up. And that is no bueno under any circumstances for our health because we're just piling up and piling up this glucose that we never actually burn, we never actually use up. So that is also something that I have come to learn from listening to some other experts and really understanding, like when we're talking about stress, right? When we're talking about, again, anger and frustration. So yeah, you can't put anger or frustration in a test tube necessarily, but let's just be clear that there's a true response chemically in the body that is creating a cascade of events that is affecting us, right? So this is again why it becomes so important to support the liver and why it becomes important to work on digesting and processing those bitter emotions. So tangibly, what is it? What can you do? So the first thing that I would recommend, so in addition to what we've just talked about as far as the bitter foods and the bitter herbs, when it comes to this aspect of digesting the emotions, make sure that you are moving your body often as much as you can, whether it's taking breaks while you're walking, but also like doing more extended periods of walking or some other form of exercise because you've got to move your body to burn up all of that glucose, all of that energy that the body lovingly released, thinking that you were in real danger. But then it turns out, okay, maybe it's just some stressor from work or something you're ruminating over, right? And I'm not saying that those things are not real danger, but again, if we're looking at it from just a purely evolutionary perspective, like the body, that mechanism is in place to help us, to save us. So, but the other part of the equation, which is the physical exertion, if it's not happening enough, that shit is going to pile up in our systems and create all kinds of havoc. And then the other suggestion I have is to make sure that you are de-stressing daily. So the physical movement is going to play a role, but then also finding dedicated time, especially like at the end of the day. This is my personal preference. At the end of the day, to give yourself time to unwind and to relax. And that does not then mean to try to distract ourselves. Because at some point, your system literally needs to not have more inputs to deal with, right? And so it's ideally quiet time, as much as quiet as it can be, as focused and one-minded as it can be, sometime where you're not distracted, because your body, that digestion of the emotions becomes harder to do if you're still being bombarded with other information, with other noise, sights, sounds, other things. You just need some quiet time. What that looks like is up to you. A simple thing that I like to do in the evenings is just laying down on my exercise mat or my yoga mat in what is known as shavasana, which is corpse pose. That's the pose you do at the end of a yoga class. You're just laying down there. That's one of the things I just like to do at the end of the day, because what it does is I'm close to the ground. I feel like I'm just being held by the ground, and it's just a time to you're doing nothing. You're just letting gravity, and it just feels like gravity, right? The force of the earth just kind of drains out whatever you don't need, That's a simple thing. So again, it does not mean you can meditate if you want. There's different ways of going about this. But the point is there's no multitasking, there's no distraction. And it's a time to say, all right, let me make sure I get rid of as much of the unnecessary energy that I picked up throughout the day, whether it's from being in traffic or just an annoying conversation, right? It doesn't have to be some big thing, but enough things can, or something I read online that annoyed me, enough of those things will pile up and sit there. So don't want them to keep just building up and building up and building up. I also did recently did a live where I talked about like foot massage at the end of the evening and how helpful that can be, because going back to Chinese medicine, when we, let's say, massage our feet, right, we're taking our energy, our focus from up here with all of the thinking, and we're taking it down, right? And we're taking it down to the furthest point of our body, which is the feet. And it's also a part of the body that we ignore. It also is a part of the body where basically our entire, all of our organ systems are mapped because there are pressure points on the bottom of the feet that correlate to different organs in the body. So it's just another great self-care practice that you can do to unwind. And I'll make sure to link to that video so that you can check it out. So that's something to keep in mind. So really the whole point of this is please do not wait for the day when you have scheduled a massage or the day that you have planned to catch up on self-care, because self-care really cannot be a thing that we schedule. It has to be something that we learn to really incorporate into our day little by little, because again, all of this piles up. And the reason that we're waking up in the middle of the night, right, is yes, the liver is trying to do something, but it's also like you can't outsmart the body, you can't outrun your body, right? Because you can't beat nature. Nature is in charge here. And so gotta face the things at some point. And this for me was actually a tremendous realization at some point, to realize that, oh yeah, like if I never slow down and give my body time to digest things, then it will find the one time where I try to be quiet, which is when I'm sleeping, and wake me up, right? Because you must face it. Like I said, Mother Nature is in charge. We don't get to tell her what to do. We are here to just do our very best to make sure that we create an environment so that she can do what she knows to do for us. And when we don't, boy oh boy, the body has infinite number of ways to get our attention, because there's trillions of cells. And again, do the math on trillions of cells and how many possible ways it can get our attention. It is never ending. So I really strongly encourage you to really think about it from that perspective. So yes, the foods, the herbs are important and they are necessary, because we can't, we can only deal with the body can only deal with so much stuff, because not only is the liver processing everything I've just talked about, it's also processing, whatever is coming from our skincare products that is making its way into our bloodstream, whatever we're picking up from air, whatever we're picking up from the water, whatever we're picking up from potentially, whether it's pesticides in foods or whether it's processed foods that we're eating, like all of that through the liver. So, I mean, when you really start to think about it, you're like, oh my God, like you gotta love your liver, because it is doing a lot, right? And so anything that you can do to help it is going to also help your sleep. So that's what I wanted to share with you in this video. Those are my 3 strategies. Embrace bitterness. It's a wonderful thing when you start to play with it. And I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, leave them leave them below. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. Please share with anybody else who could benefit from this information. And if you are looking for more help and just guidance to support you in a midlife, you're going through perimenopause or not, you're just in midlife, I invite you to come and join my community, because that is the space where I am really working on just creating, like a room basically of like-minded women where you get to find your own way. You get to work on these basic principles that support your body, but in a way that makes sense for your life, right? And for your preferences. And so it's not about strict protocols, and it's not about chasing a new fix, right? For every new symptom. Because if you notice, everything I've said in this video is really not original. right? I've not really said anything you've not heard here, which is eat whole foods, take some herbs, and de-stress. That's actually not earth shattering in that sense. And that's ultimately what I do in that group, is just to create a space where you can really start to build these, what I call like these basic habits that work for everything, right? So again, instead of chasing a new fix, a new hack for everything that comes up, you now have your own toolkit that works for you no matter what hits you. And that's it. So I have a link to the community in the description section as well. And thank you for watching. And I'll see you next time. Bye.